פרופסור סנדל מאוניברסיטת הרווארד, הוא אחד הפרופסורים המוכרים בעולם, בטח בתחומו פילוסופיה פוליטית. הקורס שלו תחת הכותרת צדק הוא אחד הפופולריים והמוכרים ביותר בהרווארד. הכיתות שלו נראות יותר כמו אולמות קונצרטים, יותר גדולים מזה מאשר כיתות. I'm saying a couple nice stuff about you, don't worry. אוקיי, מייקרופון. הספר שלו שנקרא צדק יצא עכשיו בעברית, וספרו חדש יצא רק לאחרונה בארצות הברית, מה כסף לא יכול לקנות, נדבר על זה עוד מעט, הוא כבר מאיים להפוך לרב מחר אם לא הפך כבר. Professor Sandel, please pick up the microphone, and I was asked that you keep it close to your... How are you?
Good. Good to be with you.
Professor, you made philosophy cool. You know, here in Israel, if it's not technology or finance or maybe law, ask your peers here, nobody goes to study philosophy anymore. Is there any hope?
I think so. I find that students are very interested in philosophy.
Really? Well,
Yes.
they are, because you have like classes of like 15,000 people.
Well, when I was an undergraduate, I took a course in political philosophy, and I found it very dull, abstract, distant, and difficult. They gave us books by famous people, Plato and Aristotle, and I couldn't understand them. And I couldn't understand how they connected to things I care about. So I put philosophy aside and studied other things. And I didn't really become interested in it, again, until some years later in graduate school. I was always interested in politics, but I wanted to learn about the moral foundations of public life. And I became hooked by it. And when I started teaching, I asked myself, what way of teaching political philosophy would have interested me back when I was an undergraduate? And if you put questions to students, introduce them to these famous books, but in relation to contemporary questions, contemporary debates in politics and law that raise big questions, then I find that students love to study and argue about and read about philosophy.
Okay, we'll talk about some of these current issues.
Right.
But before we talk about that, I'd like to take you to the now famous study of this kindergarten, the daycare center in Haifa in Israel.
Yes.
You know, where you keep telling this story about the parents who are coming late to pick up their kids.
Right.
And it was mentioned later in Freakonomics as well as an example of what happens, how money changes your thinking.
Yes.
Well, tell us about this.
Well, this takes us to the new book that you just mentioned, What Money Can't Buy, The Moral Limits of Markets. And what the Israeli daycare study showed, they had problems, people probably know the story. Parents coming late to pick up their children.
They know this story because they do it every day, yeah.
So with the help of some economists, the daycare center established a fine for late arriving parents. And what happened was, more parents arrived late, not fewer. This is at odds with what standard economic reasoning would teach. If you establish a price, or if you raise a price, fewer people, not more people, will demand that good. Here it was the other way. Why? Well, what happened was, the parents treated the fine as if it were a fee for a service, like a babysitting service. Before, when they came late, they felt guilty. They were imposing an obligation on the teachers. Now, they're simply hiring a teacher to look after their child for a longer period of time. What this story shows, I think, well, some economists would say what it shows is the fine wasn't high enough, which may be true. But there's a more important moral to the story, which is that sometimes introducing a market incentive or a cash incentive can change the meaning of a good or a social practice and can crowd out or undermine, even corrupt, attitudes, values, and norms that markets themselves can't supply. In this case, the sense of obligation to show up on time. And this happens, the daycare story is interesting because it sheds light on a bigger phenomenon, the tendency for markets today to reach into spheres of life far removed from material goods in health, education, civic life, national security, personal relations. And what we often overlook is the danger that introducing a cash incentive, introducing money, changes the meaning of the good.
Okay, let's take it further. What about giving incentives or paying kids or students to study better, to read more books, to excel? Just give them some money, they'll do it.
This has been tried. In New York City schools, they've offered cash incentives for kids to get good grades, $50 for an A, $40 for a B. You sound tempted by that idea.
That's a nice rate.
In Dallas, they pay young children $2 for each book they read. Now, the goal is to provide an incentive to learn. It's an admirable goal. These have had very mixed results, but the danger is that the lesson being taught is that reading or learning is a chore that you should do for pay. And if that's the lesson that's taught, the effect will be to corrupt or crowd out the intrinsic love of learning. So it's another example of the way in which marketizing a good can crowd out values and norms and attitudes worth caring about.
So where's the line? What you're saying is that we're shifting from a market economy to a market society, something like that, right?
Right.
Where's the line? How do you draw the line?
Right. Well, a market economy is a tool, a valuable tool for organizing productive activity. A market society is a place where everything is up for sale. And what I think we need to do, what we have failed to do in recent years, has been to have a public debate about where markets serve the public good and where they don't belong, where they may crowd out other important values. That is, I would say, that is the great missing debate in contemporary democracies. What is the line? How should we decide where markets belong and where they don't? It's hard to give a general answer to your question because the answer, if I'm right about this tendency of markets sometimes to corrupt goods, values, attitudes, the answer will vary case by case. It may be one answer for health, another for education, another for military service. So we have to debate case by case with respect to each of these goods, each of these aspects of social life, whether markets will crowd out important values, civic values, moral values, and if so, how important are those values?
Is this beyond the traditional argument between socialism and capitalism?
I think it is. I think it is beyond that argument. We're familiar with the debate about distributive justice, about equality and inequality. And that debate is connected to this one, but it's different. Because to engage in this debate, we have to deliberate together, reason together in public about how to value these various goods. Should there be a market in organs, kidneys for transplantation? It might increase the supply, say some economists. Should there be a market in pregnancy, paid pregnancy, surrogate motherhood? Should we outsource war to private military companies? Now, the answer...
These are actually things that are happening.
They are, indeed. And they're happening. What happens when we shy away from these debates is not that we're neutral toward them. It's that markets will decide these questions for us. So I think part of what's hollowed out public discourse in many of our democratic societies is a reluctance to engage in public with serious debate about the meaning of goods, for that matter, the meaning of the good life. We shrink from that debate. And yet the result is that there is a moral void that is often filled by either managerial and technocratic kinds of public discourse or by markets.
Now, what's happening in Wall Street? Is this market or is this just greed?
Well, what happened with the financial crisis, I think when the financial crisis hit, most people thought, now at last will be a time of reckoning, a time of questioning the role that markets should play in our society. We had experienced 3 decades, really, of a kind of faith, a market triumphalist faith. The faith that markets and market mechanisms are the primary instruments for achieving the public good. And in 2008, I think most people thought markets and morals had become detached. And we had to ask, as a society, how to reconnect them. What is surprising and disappointing is that that debate hasn't really happened. The financial crisis had relatively little impact on the public debate, the public discourse of democratic societies. And we have not had a serious debate about the role of money and markets in our
Moreover,
societies.
it's exactly the same, if not worse.
This market faith, this unquestioned assumption has, if anything, deepened its hold. We've had debates about regulatory reform, but those are very narrow debates for the most part. And we haven't really taken on the question of too big to fail with Wall Street firms and investment companies. But beyond that, we've not raised this broader question as a society about where markets belong, where they can serve the public good, and where other values should prevail.
Now, the title of your book is What Money Can't Buy. Is there anything money can't buy?
There are fewer and fewer things these days that money can't buy. There are some goods that almost everyone would agree money can't buy. Friendship, for example. If you
can take anything to the extreme, you know.
Well, suppose
rich people may have a lot of friends because they're rich.
All right, well, that's the question. Suppose you wanted more friends than you have, and you had difficulty acquiring them in the usual way. You might try to buy some, but it would probably quickly occur to you that it wouldn't work. Now, it's an interesting philosophical question why it wouldn't work, but somehow we sense that a hired friend, a bought friend, is not the same as a real one, as an authentic one. Somehow the money that would buy the friend dissolves the good, the relationship that we seek. Now, that may be clear enough in the case of friendship, but there are many aspects of social life and personal relations where money can buy more and more, including expressions of friendship.
What else? What else money can't buy?
Can it not buy?
It cannot buy.
Love? Well, that would be love, friendship, happiness.
The Beatles said that. Money can't buy you love. Huh?
Yeah.
Oh.
But people try to buy these things, and we try to use money to buy things that we think will bring us friends or love or happiness. And sometimes money can buy those intermediate goods, but the question is whether they should. And that's where we need to discuss whether family life and community life and civic life are diminished, are eroded in their meaning, in their value, if we try to buy them, if money governs them.
Going back to the discussion you were alluded to, Occupy Wall Street, the Arab Spring, some demonstrations we had here in Israel last summer. Is there a silver lining there?
I think it's a healthy development that there are these stirrings, voices of protest, and we see them across the political spectrum. I think there's a widespread frustration with the terms of political discourse in democratic societies around the world. And part of the source of the frustration, I think, is a sense that our public discourse is empty, morally empty. It's not addressing the big questions that people care about, questions of justice, debates about equality and inequality, and the topic we've just now been discussing about the role of markets and the nature of the good life and what it means to be a citizen. You can listen to the public debates that we have into the political parties, the established political parties around the world, and hear very little discussion of those things. So I think the movements that we've seen recently, which have largely to do with justice and equality and inequality, are a healthy sign. And the question is how to extend those debates and those arguments on all sides and put them at the center of our public debates.
And with this, I'll thank you very much, Professor Sandel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.